Planned Parenthood aggressively working to get access to our kids. And the reason's pretty obvious. It creates a pipeline of clients. You know, if you hook them young and the kids come to trust you, when they start being sexually active, they'll show up at your clinic. Once they show up at your clinic, then you can be the one to counsel them on any one of their options, even though we know that Planned Parenthood only offers one option, which is abortion. Monica?
Hello.
Got him.
Okay. So guys, because I've never used Instagram Live before, I'm a genius though. I figured it out. I had to go into settings and let Instagram use my microphone. That was it.
You did it. That's all that mattered. So
I know.
Good work. Yay. Well, I'm so excited, and welcome to everybody who's here. We are going to have a great conversation. So I was just kind of saying, you know, the reason this conversation is so important is because by Planned Parenthood increasingly having access to our kids, creating a pipeline of clients. You know, hook them young, get them excited and trusting your brand. Active, I'm going to go to Planned Parenthood. And we know Planned Parenthood profits off of kids being sexually active, adults being sexually active. And so I'm excited for this conversation because you have such a wealth of experience in this area, having kind of been on both sides of the fence. And we're going to attack that today. So let's just dive right in to first who you are. We'll tell a little bit about me, but really this is an opportunity for people to hear from you. So I'll give some background first, and then I'll get out of the way as I just ask you questions. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Joanna Hyatt. I've spent over 10 years in the pro-life abstinence world. I used to lead a nationally replicated sex education program based out of Los Angeles. I was speaking to thousands of teens in the LA area in public, private schools, confirmation classes, abstinence-based education. And I have a passion for seeing our kids live out a healthy, God-honoring sexual ethic. And Planned Parenthood does not support that in any number of ways. But I first encountered Monica actually on a video that I saw online. Now we've since become friends, spoken at conferences together, but she was what we call is a quitter. She quit the abortion related industry. And I heard her speaking as somebody who had educated the people that go into the classrooms to talk about this. And she herself had been in the classroom. And that was just such an exciting moment to see somebody who was in something that is so near and dear to my heart, having quit and walked out of that and having a passion now to turn around and partner with parents and educate kids to actually live a healthy sexuality. So welcome, Monica. So glad you're here. Give us a little bit of a background on kind of your work previously in Planned Parenthood and the Title 10, all of that, and then kind of what caused you to come out of that.
Okay. Well, can you still hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'm one of your big fans, Joanna. So I love that I got to meet you, and you're an amazing speaker. And so the fact that we have opportunities to work together, I'm really excited about. And I think it's like we're salt and pepper in so many different ways because, you know, you grew up in more of a purity culture, which I know you've written about a little bit. And then, you know, I came from the opposite background in the work that I did. And so, yes, my background is that in 1996, I started volunteering for an HIV organization. It was actually the Austin Latino, Latina, Lesbian, and Gay Organization. And they had this prevention outreach. And I, you know, just right out of college, it's the 90s. I'm worried about HIV and the communities. You know, I had heard that it was among people of color and marginalized populations. And so I wanted to go out there and help save lives. I wanted to keep people, especially people of color, who I knew were being impacted greatly by the virus, and especially in impoverished populations. I was like, I want to be there. So I started volunteering and was quickly hired and became an HIV specialist. And I was quickly taught about the gay culture as well. So that was a big part of my training, is to know everything about men who have sex with men. I knew everything about lesbians and everything in between. At some point, I even created a forum for transgender people, and I ran a transgender group for about a year until I transitioned them to a mental health provider. And so I did this because I had a lot of compassion and love for people. I didn't, if someone felt marginalized even today, I want to be right there with them to make them feel better. So within a month of being hired as an HIV specialist, they said, well, you need to learn how to do this and teach children how to, about prevention. So they sent me across the street to Planned Parenthood. It's on 7th Street and Chico on there in East Austin and in Texas. And I had the director of sex education sit me down for a private training, and she became my mentor. And she was a woman from the community. She was raised in the community, lived in the community, and was teaching in the community. And she was much older. She just looked like a cute, sweet grandma, and she really was a really sweet woman. But she mentored me on how to teach children comprehensive sex education. And one of the first things that she taught me, and this is a really big piece of my testimony, and I think I usually use this quote as it really brings everything together about the philosophy behind comprehensive sex education and what they think about our children. But she said, she shared some stories about the girls coming into the clinic, girls as young as 10 coming with STDs, coming in for abortions, sometimes even to remove objects from their body. And it sounded like sexual violence to me. No 10-year-old girl is doing this voluntarily. This is abuse. And by law, it's abuse. So she assured me, patted me on the knee and said, no, this is not abuse. They're choosing to do this. And that if I were to teach, because I immediately asked her, how can I help these girls to avoid sexual activity, to avoid being in those circumstances, because I wanted to protect them. And she said, no, dear, we're not here to teach them not to be sexually active. We're just here how to teach them to do it safer. And that is comprehensive sex education. It's never about abstinence. It's always about teaching children how to do it safer through risk reduction, which is comprehensive sex education. And then she, one of the first lessons she taught me was to view children a certain way. And so she said, Monica, when you walk into a room full of kids, you need to imagine that they've done anything and everything when it comes to sex. And if they haven't, they will. And it's your job as a sex educator to teach them about every sexual activity and how to reduce their risk by using condoms, lubrication, getting tested, and having abortions.
Okay, I want to pause you right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Catches that point. So when Planned Parenthood is going into our schools, our kids' schools down the street, they're going in with the assumption that that kid in that classroom, regardless of age, is either doing or going to do the things that they're going to talk about. Am I understanding that?
Absolutely.
So they're not
Absolutely.
these kids could pursue abstinence. These kids are strong enough to make good choices. They've already assumed these kids are going to make these choices, so we're going to teach to that audience versus maybe calling them up to what's the better choice or the healthier choice.
Right.
Okay.
So then I'll respond to what you just said when you said, one, abstinence is laughable to people who teach comprehensive sex education. I know because I was in it for 10 years, it's laughable. No one is ever abstinent. That's the view. Number two, when you say that children, should be choosing healthy choices, the rebuttal of a comprehensive sex educator is to say, well, it is a healthy choice to become sexually active, and it is a healthy choice for them to be using condoms consistently, to get tested and treated, and to have abortions. And so that is their philosophy. That's their mental state. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, I still, I know the difference there. So that is comprehensive sex education. And today, you don't have to just trust my word. Today, you can read the National Sex Education Standards, and I highly recommend that everyone listening right now needs to look up the National Sex Education Standards. You can find it on Advocates for Youth. I'm not recommending these websites. These are all websites of organizations that are advocates of comprehensive sex education. Planned Parenthood being one of the largest providers of comprehensive sex education, and there's a real good reason for that. But let me finish this point. You can go to SECUS. Their brand is SECUS for Sex Ed for Social Change. What they mean by social change is to end this belief that sex is for marriage and in family, or for the context of having children. So that's what they mean by social change. They want to get rid of this belief that heterosexuality is normal, which, so they don't refer to heterosexuality as normal. They say that you're being heteronormative, which is a negative term for saying it's not right for you to be thinking about the nuclear family and being heterosexual. That it's very judgmental. So they teach the children, even through comprehensive sex education, to not be heteronormative, but to be open to all things. So when you look up the National Sex Education Standards, you're going to see on there their philosophy. They believe that children are sexual from birth, and so they believe that this education should start from birth. They want children to learn it in preschool. We're seeing that in some of the schools as well, and through elementary school. So you don't have to take my word for it. Just go to the National Sex Education Standards, because they have almost like a rubric, a chart that shows you what they plan to teach children at different ages. So it's all out there. You can also review any of the curriculum. I highly recommend going to Stop CSE is a website, or you can Google Stop CSE. And this is a website that is really, there's a coalition of moms, to be honest, all over the country. And we have been getting together for years, working together on combating comprehensive sex education. So on that website, Stop CSE, you will see examples of various comprehensive sex education curricula that's out there. You will also see some rubrics of what we've called the 15 harmful elements, which, we use that to review a comprehensive sex education curriculum and see how many harmful elements are in there. And so you can access all of that in Stop CSE. The reason I recommend that is because, Joanna, we're about to talk about how you can get this kind of education in Planned Parenthood out of your school, and that's an important tool. So definitely go to Stop CSE to look at some of those tools.
And I wanted people to first understand what is Planned Parenthood's attitude when they're going into a classroom, because that, one, should hopefully inspire you and motivate you to say we have to be engaged in our communities of either kicking Planned Parenthood out or making sure Planned Parenthood doesn't enter, because they're not coming in with the same values that we have. They don't see a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, or I think you were even saying 8-year-olds who are sexually active. They don't see that as problematic. They don't see that as unhealthy. They see that as normal, as good, and ultimately they profit off of these children. They are children who are sexually active. And so you just got to know what you're up against when you choose to do this. There's not only a financial incentive for Planned Parenthood to be in a school. They make money when a school district signs a contract with them, but there's also, for them, it's an ideological motivation. And so we need to be as passionate and focused about why we are doing the work to fight this, to push back, because it's gonna take some time, it's gonna take some effort, but it's a worthy cause. So you let that, by the way, would you talk briefly that, I love the story you share where you talked in the class about how kids didn't have to have sex, and just that aha moment for that particular class and that little girl who just had never heard that.
Right. So Planned Parenthood asked me to go and sub for them at a alternative school in East Austin. And the reason this is also an important story is that many of the arguments are that, we need this for at-risk youth. We need this kind of education for youth whose parents aren't there for them, who are active, sexually active. Well, this is an example of me going into an alternative school in a high-risk neighborhood with high-risk children. Alternative schools are for children who've been kicked out of various schools, and this is really their last chance to finish their education. And so these are middle schoolers that I was about to speak to. So they're about 13, 14 years old, and they're already in an alternative school. So these are high-risk youth. So I'm sitting there talking to them and teaching them about HIV prevention. And it's very customary that I would always write on the whiteboard behind me the different forms of sex. So if anyone has kids around, don't let them listen to this part. Or any of this, to be honest. This is just for the parents, please. So I would write down the different forms of sex, which was oral, anal, and vaginal. And then on the other side of the board, I'd write down the bodily secretions or bodily fluids, really, that carry HIV and other diseases. And so I would start the conversation. And the little girl raised her hand, 13 years old, beautiful, very deep, dark skin, very clear skin. Her hair was braided away from her face. Just later on, I found out she was an athlete, and she was very slim and tall, slender. And she raised her hand and had an honest question. And I'll clean up her language. She was not being disrespectful. No one even reacted with shock with what she asked me because it was very normal for them. You need to also understand in this neighborhood, it was very traditional for me to visit this neighborhood and drop off bags of condoms to moms who were also prostitutes during the day while their children were in school. So this is the environment that they lived in. And so this little girl said, when I'm involved in this sexual activity, I gag. Can you teach me how to do it better? And I'm sure all of you listening, that's probably tearing up your heart to hear that kind of question. And it did for me as well, to be honest. Even if I was a comprehensive sex educator at the time, that was really shocking for me. So I repeated her question to her so that she would understand what she was really asking. And I said, so it sounds like when you're in this activity, you have this reaction, you don't like that activity, or you don't like that reaction. And she said, that's right, I don't like it. But if you teach me how to do it better, maybe I will. So my option to her was, hey, have you ever considered just not doing the activity you don't like doing? And at that moment, all the kids just looked at me like, really? They didn't say anything. They looked very innocent. They were very calm. They didn't look like they were judged. They just looked at me like, really? And I said, guys, do you realize you don't have to be sexually active? Do you realize? And I pointed at the board behind me, said, you don't have to have oral sex, vaginal sex, anal sex. And if you don't, you won't be in contact with any of these fluids, bodily fluids. And if you're not, you won't get diseases and you won't get pregnant. And the little girl raised her hand again. And she said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that before. And the next thing I know, these kids are starting to talk about abstinence. They didn't use the word abstinence. They just started talking about, you know what, we don't have to have sex, or we don't expect to have sex. And they were talking about playing basketball. They were talking about watching movies at the community center because they all lived in government housing and they had free movies and free snacks. So that was something that they talked about doing. I mean, these kids were literally coming up with really great ideas of how they could hang out, be friends, and not actually touch each other, not have sex. And at some point, I even got nervous because I thought my job is to teach them about sex. And all of a sudden, I've got these kids talking about abstinence. But they were the ones coming up with those decisions. A little girl pulled away from the group and she came back and asked me, she said, ma'am, I can't do what they're doing. And I said, well, why not? And she said, because I already have sex and everyone expects me to have sex. So now I can't say no. And I said, no, sweetie, that's not true. No one can ever tell you that you have to have sex. You can stop whenever you want. You never have to have sex again if you don't want to. You can wait until you're married, but you have the right to say no. And she smiled, her shoulders relaxed, and she went back to the group, and they kept talking about abstinence. The little girl, it was really funny. One of the little boys said, hey, we can get these free basketballs from the community center and go play basketball. And the little girl who asked the question, she said, boy, you know I'm better at basketball than you, and I'll kick your butt on that court. And he just kind of shrugged. He said, I know, but it'll still be fun. I mean, they were so sweet, Joanna. And here's the truth is that if you look at any curriculum of comprehensive sex education, but especially from Planned Parenthood, and you look at what they call abstinence, their suggestions for abstinence is touching each other over the clothes, mutual masturbation, taking a shower together. All of it is still about arousal that will lead to sexual activity. None of it was about playing basketball or just watching a movie with friends. So even abstinence is very distorted in the minds of people like Planned Parenthood and organizations like Planned Parenthood. And you have to understand that Planned Parenthood is a business. And so they do charge a lot of money for some of their curriculum, but sometimes they're willing to do this for free. Why? Because sex education is the marketing tool and the vehicle that feeds the abortion industry. And so when you look at their annual report, and you can Google that right now, Planned Parenthood annual report, And you'll see that, they spend most of their money on medical services, which is abortion. And then the second line item is sex education. And the reason they put so much money into sex education is because that is their marketing budget. That is how they market to the population, to children, to bring them into the clinic, create a demand for their services, whether it's STD testing or birth control, because they know that those kids are going to get a disease or pregnant at some point. They've already established a relationship with them through the education and through the services, that now abortion is exactly what they're going to go for, and they're going to go to Planned Parenthood for that. So it just creates this sales funnel for them, and a cycle of death for these communities. And that's what I finally realized at some point in my 10 years, is that we were meeting people where they're at, and we're just leaving them there. We were not helping them out of their situation. If anything, we were pulling them into this cycle of death where they're basically destroying themselves. We're teaching children how to dehumanize one another by objectifying each other through the act of recreational sex. And then it becomes a natural next step for them to dehumanize their own preborn children through abortion. So, this is the mind manipulation that happens with comprehensive sex education, and it's laced with empowerment, those kind of words, a lot of positive words. But the truth is that it's really just teaching our children to objectify themselves.
Yeah. Okay, now that we've made the case for why we need to not have Planned Parenthood in our schools, I hope, if you're watching this, you realize, man, this is awful. And I see a question coming through. We're going to hold those. But, okay, I'm a parent. I know Planned Parenthood is in my school, or I actually want to find out if Planned Parenthood is in my school. And we're going to have a free infographic for people to be able to download that roadmaps a lot of this. So you don't have to try to hurry and take notes. Just give us your attention. But how do I go about, as a parent, finding out who's actually teaching sex education? Is sex education happening in my school? At what level, things like that. Let's start there, and then we're going to unpack how you go about beginning to get Planned Parenthood out of your schools.
Right. So one of the first things you can do is, it's important to know your state laws, your education code. A lot of that will help you understand who's making decisions about sex education in your school, what kind of sex education your state allows. Some states only allow comprehensive sex education. Other states only allow abstinence education. So first of all, you need to know where you stand in your state. So this is why it's important for parents to become politically involved. Political involvement is not a bad word. It's going to save your kids and your future. So find that out. And then talk to your school. I wouldn't say to a teacher necessarily. I would go to the principal or the superintendent or your school board, whatever that's called in your state, and ask them if to number one, are they teaching risk reduction, which is comprehensive sex education. That just means risk reduction is a secondary health approach. What it means is you're involved in a high risk activity, and we're just going to teach you how to reduce the risk. That's what that means. Comprehensive sex education is risk reduction education. A primary intervention is avoidance. Things like don't smoke, don't do drugs, avoid it altogether so that you don't have these health risks. So that's what abstinence is. It's avoiding sexual behavior to avoid the disease in an unplanned pregnancy. You want to find that out. So those are some of the health terms that you want to know. Ask to review the curriculum. And when you review the curriculum, most schools are not going to let you take it home with you or anything like that. I'll be very surprised that some schools might actually have it online and you can see it online. But you not only want to look at the curriculum, you want to look at the teacher's manual. It's very important to find out what the teachers are being told to actually speak in the classroom, because that's where you start to see the philosophy and all the behind the scenes stuff that you're not going to see in their curriculum. You also want to review all the supplemental handouts, anything that they're going to give the kids. Are there handouts? Are there web links? Are there organizations that they're referring to them to? Because many times they're referring them to Planned Parenthood's RU, ROO, which is a sex chat box. And so basically kids can literally go to Roo on their phone and ask questions about sex, and have Planned Parenthood respond to them. So is that something that they're giving out? Are they referring them to web links like answer.org, which are very graphic cartoon videos for children? Are they referring them to Ask Alice, which is also through Planned Parenthood, also to ask about sexual questions? So there's all kinds of supplemental resources that they give students. You want to know everything from handouts to websites to apps, things like that. Another thing that they do, and you need to watch out for, is that they will teach children how to navigate the healthcare system without parental knowledge, and the government helps them with that. So the CDC, for example, believes and has instituted adolescent confidentiality, so that adolescents don't need to have parental consent to go get STD testing or anything like that, which really just keeps parents away from being able to help their own children. So it may be a difficult thing to do, but it's the healthiest thing to do for a parent to be involved in that. Title 10 is the grant money, is the grant that I used to train on. It's family planning. They allow for children as young as 12 or of childbearing age to access women's reproductive health care. So a girl, if she's of reproductive age, let's say she's 9 because she's already had her period since she was 9 years old, she can actually walk into any Title 10 clinic and get birth control, and parents don't have to be with her. So the government actually really helps in keeping parents out of the picture. So those are things that you want to watch out for, because these curriculum will teach children how to navigate the healthcare system without parent knowledge or consent. So once you review that, the other thing that I really recommend, Joanna, is don't do this by yourself. Mom, whoever's listening, don't do this by yourself, because it's a huge endeavor, and there's going to be a lot of controversy. And so people aren't going to like that you're asking questions. But I do want to encourage you that you are the steward over your own children. No one will love or protect your children more than you. So do not worry about controversy. Do not worry about being shamed or called names. Your job is to protect your child. And so, I'll be praying for you, but this is why you need to really have other like-minded parents with you, so that you're not doing this alone, and you can do this research together. So if you're hearing about parents being successful across the country combating sex education, CRT, it's because they're coming together and they're unified together and they're researching together. So I highly recommend you get some like-minded parents to do that together.
And I would add too, the content of the material that you will see parents, and you can't. Oh,
are you gone?
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Okay, there you are.
I was going to say another thing to that point. What you are going to see in that curriculum is heavy. It's really heavy, and I know this because here in my hometown, I'm up in Washington State. You can pray for me. And here in Washington State, where I live, we fought Planned Parenthood getting into the schools. And part of that was that we looked at all of the curriculum and we pulled out, this is what we don't like. This is problematic. This is, encouraging sexual activity. There's no examples here that these kids are acting out that actually promote abstinence. And you had to go through and look at all that. And as a parent, as an adult, it felt so wrong. And then to think that these children, some of them as young as 6th grade, will be learning this content is heartbreaking. So it's heavy as an individual to look at this, which is why you need a group of parents. And we were able to, in our case, Planned Parenthood had not yet gotten into the school. And so we managed to fight from, keep them out. And so I want to touch a little bit on that some of you may not have Planned Parenthood yet in your local schools. Now, that's not to say you don't have something just as bad. What we did get was just as bad, but Planned Parenthood didn't get the $115,000, that come into our schools. It was a small, tiny victory. But as parents, our greatest impact is when we show up in mass. The most terrifying thing to an elected official is an angry voter, whether that is a mom, a dad, a single person, married, it doesn't actually matter. It's an angry voter, because whether they like it or not, we represent their future job security. And so your school boards, they are elected positions. They have to win you over. And, you know, we're seeing across the country people waking up to the fact that, oh, wait, school boards have a lot of control. School boards have a lot of input. And so you do have to show up at those school board meetings. You have to push back. But part of that, like the effectiveness, is not just one person ranting all the time. It's dozens and then hundreds of parents consistently showing up. And you will build momentum as you do this. So whether Planned Parenthood is in there or not, you're going to need a group of parents. You're going to need to know what the curriculum is or what's being considered, and then you're going to need to have a game plan for how you're going to expose this to the community, because really it's about exposing it to the community. Somebody commented, you know, this seems problematic that this would be presented to kids, but there's loopholes in state laws. It's my understanding that what we would say, hey, if I walk up to a kid and start reading this, that's pornographic. In a classroom, it's education. And so parents don't realize that there's these loopholes. So you have to expose this to the community to say, we don't want this for our kids. We don't even care if it's actually legally allowed in our state. It's unacceptable, and we're not going to stand for it. And so as you grow that group of parents, what is that strategy for beginning to actually, once you've looked at the curriculum, you got it in hand, whether you took pictures, whether you photocopied, whether you could see it online, what are some of those tangible next steps that these parent groups can start to take?
Well, I want to emphasize that righteous anger is good. And what I mean by righteous anger is that you're going to be strategic. I want you to go in there with proof. I want you to go in there with a strategy. Sometimes in the board meetings, you're only going to be given maybe 1, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And especially when they see lots of parents are coming, they might have started at 5 minutes and now they're just giving you 1 minute. And so a good strategy that a lot of moms came up with, and that you can see on Stop CSC, is called the tsunami effect. And that's really that when you get together as a group, you come up with all the points and proof that you want to present. And you know you can't do that in the time allotted that they're giving you. So then every parent takes a different point. So Joanna takes this point, and then I take the next point, and someone else takes another point. I saw Jerry on there. Jerry takes another point. You know, I saw Unifier. I haven't met him yet, but I know he's been following me. He takes another point, and we do it as a team, and we do it professionally. A lot of times also they're going to be asking about, you know, being compassionate. When I testified, and I'll be releasing this video soon, I testified at the state school board here in Texas about our health TEKS, which are education standards. And I want to touch on that too. And what was effective is that when they would come to me and say, but what about this population? Aren't you compassionate for them? And of course I am, because I'm compassionate for all of the children. So for example, you know, they're saying we need comprehensive sex education because the LGBTQ children need this. What about them? And what I say to that is comprehensive sex education sexualizes children. And so according to the CDC, children who have same-sex attraction are at even higher risk than their heterosexual peers. For getting disease and for sexual violence and all of these things. Are even less likely to use condoms. Now, this is all data I've gotten from the CDC. I said, so that tells me that we need to protect them just as much, if not more, than their heterosexual peers. And comprehensive sex education is not the best way to lead these children, whether heterosexual or same-sex attracted, to optimal health. And so I want the same for all of the children. So just because all these organizations are saying that children who have same-sex attraction need to learn Sex 101 with all kinds of, and they've actually said, oh, they need to learn about how to have lesbian sex, how to have this sex. And I'm saying, no, you don't sexualize children. They're minor children, and they all will benefit from optimal health messages, which is to avoid sex in childhood. Help them to have friendships, help them to focus on academics and to achieve academically, and that they can make those decisions when they become adults. a good sexual risk avoidance program in a school will also let children know, regardless of their identity, that marriage is the healthiest context for sex. So we're not taking anything away from any child saying that, because it's healthier for all of them, regardless of how they identify. So, we can do all this with compassion. We have science on our side. And so really what's needed is, and you can go to my website to get some of these resources as well, is getting the facts, getting the data. Once you know the facts, once you have the data, it's a lot easier for you to present this. Now, does it always work? No, because like Joanna was saying, is that if the school board is very heavy supporting CSE, a lot of times it doesn't matter what you say. But something that Joanna mentioned that's really important, that again, I want you to be politically involved about, is the obscenity exemptions. And so we do have obscenity laws that you cannot present sexual or violent things to children. The obscenity exemption actually says that you can, as long as it's for educational purposes, which is why they're able to do this in the schools. So that's the loophole. And so what a lot of my friends are doing is working on repealing the obscenity exemption so that it no longer exists and that schools can no longer do this. So we need our politicians, that when they create these laws, to have teeth to those laws. So if there isn't a consequence, if no one's losing a job, if no one's paying a fine, if no one's going to jail, then they'll just keep doing it all day long, because it's like, well, there's this law. Well, if you're not going to enforce it, it doesn't matter. I'll just keep doing it. So we need laws that have teeth in them. But these are all things that you can be doing and you should be doing, because as you saw in Virginia, the way parents, were able to organize all over that state, especially in Loudoun County, were able to turn things around for the entire state. And they elected a governor that is really representing family there, and an attorney general as well. So obviously there is power in numbers, and you just keep doing that. A lot of parents will read the sex education curriculum in those meetings, or the graphic novels that are being presented to the children at the schools as well. And that's very effective also.
And I want to point out, what's interesting about Virginia, unless I've missed something, Loudoun County didn't change anything, right? Parents were showing up, parents were in mass, and Loudoun County has still not reversed any positions. And yet it garnered enough attention that the rest of the state said, okay, this isn't working. This is a problem. So we need to figure out where we can cause there to be change. So in you going to your school board and going to your school board meetings and raising awareness, you may not see an immediate impact in the actual school board and their decisions. We're in my hometown, we're dealing with a very progressive, pro-Planned Parenthood school board. And so you have to then say, okay, our secondary goal is that we're gaining attention for parents to know this, community members to know this, and then for them to start to ask their other elected officials, well, why is this allowed? Mm-hmm. Why did, for instance, in our state, Washington, why did the state superintendent of public education mandate this certain type of sex education? Oh, suddenly I care about that elected office. And suddenly the conversation becomes a little bit bigger. And so you find different ways that you can begin to push back. And so don't give up. If in going to the school board, you don't see the school board respond, you are still in the fight, raising awareness and making other politicians have to be accountable. Because again, the most terrifying thing to an elected official is an angry voter. Not a passive one, not an angry voter who takes the time to show up, who takes the time to articulate what they believe, whether that's in an email, whether that's in a phone call, a letter to the editor, because that takes time. And time is something not a lot of people are willing to invest. So when you take the time to push back on behalf of the kids in your community, you will start to get attention. And it'll be good attention, and it'll not be, I've been called names. I'm sure Monica's been called names because what we're pushing back against, as we've talked about, is a business and an ideology that looks at our children very, very differently. So keep that in mind, right? You're up against state laws in some cases. You might be up against the state superintendents of public instruction. There's a lot of different factors, and you'll start to learn this. And we don't want you to be intimidated,
Yeah.
but any little bit of fighting will be worthwhile, because there's just so much that they take for granted. No one's going to care. No one's paying attention. And when you start to pay attention, people notice. And I think that's a great point to the obscenity laws. That's obscenity exemption laws. I don't think most parents know about that. I don't think most voters know that that's a thing. So when you hear of this content, you think, how is this allowed? Now you know why. And now you know something that seems obscure. Fight against that. Fight to overturn that in your state too. There's a lot of different ways to peel this onion and get Planned Parenthood out of our schools. And really all of these sex education curriculums that aim to groom our kids, at the risk of being very straightforward. We're grooming our kids with the current sex education curriculum to be kids who are sexually active, to be kids who really are more easily taken advantage of because they're told this is normal. You should expect this. You should go along with this. So I want to shift a little bit. We've been at it for 45 minutes. I want to shift to some of the questions coming in. Now's your chance to ask Monica. And again, some of that roadmap is going to be available in an infographic. You can go to wildandbeautifulplaces.com/pp info. So wildandbeautifulplaces.com/pp info is my website, and you'll get an infographic that has all of this that Monica outlined. It also has both of our contact information so that you can stay in touch with us, because we really do want to support you. We want to give you the tools you need. Monica has a ton of great content on her website, ittakesafamily.org. So make sure you visit Monica's site, ittakesafamily.org. And that's where you're going to keep getting info on how do we really press into this fight and be equipped and learn in real time and effectively begin to expose the agenda of Planned Parenthood and then begin to get them out. Because we can. We've seen it happen. We've seen districts say, you have no place here. We've seen districts reverse their contracts with Planned Parenthood. So it can happen. I just want to encourage you on that. So let me take a look real quick to see some of our questions that we've had. I think we answered, how is it that they can avoid legal issues? Again, the obscenity exemption law. Did I say it right? The obscenity exemption law. That is a huge one. My husband would say, like, well, what if I just go down the street to a bunch of children and start reading this curriculum? Wouldn't I be thrown into jail? I'm like, well, if you just start randomly reading it, yeah. But in a classroom, you're fine. You're fine. And they can see anything, they can hear anything. And that should be appalling to us. I think it's interesting that at these school board meetings, we're seeing the microphones turned off when parents begin to actually read the content because it's so obscene. And yet somehow it's okay for our kids.
Yeah, that is very revealing. And there's been many times at the state capitol as well that we're not allowed to read material that's given to children because it's considered obscene. We can't email it to legislators because it's a government email and it's obscene, but yet it's being shared with the children. And I know Unifier on here was asking, why aren't we seeing more happening in Texas? And a lot of it is that even though we have a majority Republican House in Texas, they not all, but unfortunately many of them have turned a blind eye to a lot of this. And so we are seeing that we're going to need to primary a lot of people out. This is why it's important to be involved in politics so that we can get people, and it could be people that are watching right now who are willing to run for office and make a difference in their state. It takes that, because it takes courageous people to be able to do that. And so once again, when you start talking to legislators or at your school, you need to have a unified front, you need to have your research, you need to have your proof, and you need to have alternative solutions. That's very helpful for a politician as well, is that they may not be, they are not content experts in this, so they may not know how to fix it, but you can bring those solutions. And so this is why we need the body of Christ, just a group of people doing this together, because maybe Joanna's a great communicator, but maybe so-and-so is really good at researching the law. Some people are really good about researching, creating a report, and other people are good at presenting that report. And so you can work as a team with all of your gifts and talents to be a very strong, unified front to make a difference in your community. And then you have to make other considerations too. I know that a lot of moms, a lot of parents have actually chosen to remove their children from an environment that is consistently, bombarding them with unhealthy ideologies. So they've made sacrifices in their families to remove their children. And I don't blame them, because our children, if they're going to public school, are there practically 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they are with you much less than that. And so your influence over them is is weaker for it. And so it is important for us to make sure we're protecting our children.
Another avenue, and I spoke on this, and there's a video somewhere online. When you're testifying, you can speak to the curriculum, but also speak to who Planned Parenthood is. There is repeated documentation of what Monica was talking about at the very beginning, where a minor comes in to Planned Parenthood, they've been sexually abused, and Planned Parenthood does not report it. Planned Parenthood intentionally covers it up. They just ignore it. And that's important to expose, because Planned Parenthood has this image of being, for women. We're here in the community. We just want people to live their best life. But in reality, it is the most dangerous place for our young people to be walking into. And if you are in an abusive relationship, you're going to be sent right back to your abuser, most likely, more likely than not, because again, it's a profit game. It's a conflict of interest, right? Somebody profits off of our children being sexually active, and they're the ones tasked with teaching our kids to not be sexually active. And so knowing just more broadly the abuses of Planned Parenthood, speak to that. It's really not great for them to have parents exposing that this is not an organization that helps our kids. This is not an organization that should have access to our children in such an intimate way. And so divide up those talking points, right? So take the curriculum, take what we know about Planned Parenthood. And again, I think this was so important. We're for all kids being sexually abstinent until they're at a place where they can make a thoughtful, well-informed decision in a committed relationship such as marriage, because marriage statistically proves to be the best place. And so this isn't actually about attacking any one group of kids who identify. This is about championing the opportunity for all kids, to be like those kids in Monica's classroom who said, "You mean I don't have to have sex? I don't have to do any of these sex acts. I can just play basketball and have fun." And that's what we're championing for. We're championing for all children to be able to have a childhood free of the responsibility, the weight, the consequences of sexual activity until they're at a place where mentally, emotionally, they're a little bit more stable to think these decisions through. And so I'm so thankful you joined us. Thank you for giving so much time. Friends, I just want to remind you, go to Monica's website. ittakesafamily.org. She has a ton of resources. And if you want the free infographic that gives you the roadmap of everything we talked about and more on how you begin to push Planned Parenthood out, go to wildandbeautifulplaces.com/pp info. I'll tag it to the end of this video, but you're going to be able to get that, and that's going to give you a great starting place for how to do some of these things that Monica outlined in really making sure that we kick Planned Parenthood out of our schools, out of our kids' lives, and give our children their innocence back. Monica, is there any last things you want to say?
Yes, I do. I want to emphasize how important your role as a parent is.
Yes.
Than you will ever imagine. And I'll use this as an example. When I was actually working as a Title X training manager, my job was to train all the family planning clinics, which included Planned Parenthood. And they would always pay for me to train them privately so that they weren't mixed in with other clinics. So I always trained Planned Parenthood all on their own. And one of the number one things that they always said to me, which is why I founded my organization, It Takes a Family, is parents are a barrier to service. And when I was really, thinking that over after I quit my job, I realized, what Planned Parenthood is really saying? That parents are powerful. Parents are so powerful that when they're involved, we can't make money. Planned Parenthood is saying we cannot make money when we have powerful families and powerful parents. So in other words, guys, Planned Parenthood and the whole abortion industry and the whole comprehensive sex ed industry is afraid of strong, informed, engaged parents. It's that simple. And there is no one in this world that your children trust more, love more, want to hear from more than you. And there's lots of polls that prove that. I'll also prove it this way. When I worked as a house parent at a children's shelter, these are children who'd been severely abused by their families. The number one thing that those children wanted, every single one of them, no matter how horrible their history was, they wanted to go home to mom and dad. Because it's innate for our children. I say that only because it is innate. It is something built into us. We want the love and the support and the guidance and the leadership of our parents. And so I want to give you that encouragement that the world may seem like it's falling apart. Your kids might be rolling their eyes at you, but that's a good sign. Embrace the eye roll. I always tell parents that if you're leading, you're doing the right thing. And by and your kids watching you lead by going to the school and protecting them, it means a lot to them. They may not say it, they might even complain, but the truth is that they know you're protecting them and they need you so much. Family is powerful. So I want to encourage you guys that anything you do is good. So just keep working at it, and feel free to contact me at ittakesafamily.org. You can also follow me on my podcast, The MonicaCline Show. I got lots of information on there that you can learn from as well. And Joanna, thank you so much for having me on here. And we did our first Instagram live together. It's awesome.
Did it. We managed to both be on audio. So well done, team.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be in touch. Please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. This is a topic near and dear to our hearts, and it will not be the last time that we talk about it. Thanks.
Bye.